One of the most important aspects of your podcast isn't the tech that you use, but why you're doing it. And today we have a guest who has a very interesting why, a very interesting strategy for her podcast, and one that has been quite successful and one that I think you can learn a lot from. Today we are chatting with E.B. Moss. She is a content strategist, creator, and award-winning writer. She has a marketing consultancy at the Moss Appeal, and her podcast is Insider Interviews with E.B. Moss. E.B., thanks so much for joining us today.
So good to see you, Matthew. Thanks for having me.
It is good to see you again. We did get the chance to hang out together at Podcast Movement. I made a quick appearance on your show in the hallway conferences,
Yeah.
as we
Quick
like to
but
do.
powerful.
Yes. So I want to start by you have this background as writer, journalist, marketer. What took you from there into the podcast space to begin with?
Well, audio is audio, I think. And I describe myself as a radio brat. My dad was one of the first broadcast radio majors of Ithaca College, and we moved from market to market in radio. And I, of course, landed in radio as you do, Apple tree, that kind of thing. And so after early stage career in radio as a copywriter and voice talent, and then an actor for a while, I worked in television. And then guess what? I landed back in radio. I was working for a rep firm called Ad Large, a terrific company run by Kathy Sukas. And they were launching a podcast division while I was there. And so I found my way back into being a little bit behind the scenes and now in front of the microphone again.
As someone who has a background with a long history in real traditional radio and then television, what did you think of the podcasting space when you were first asked to work in it and sell advertising for it?
Yeah, I was actually thrilled to be a part of that. I remembered one of the early stage podcasts was a former acquaintance of mine, Kevin Pollak, the actor, and he always embraced things like anything new in tech. He's one of those actors who embraces tech, and I was listening to him do this sort of audio video thing. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And so when all things came back to being able to embrace it in an on demand kind of way, I was all over it because it didn't seem risky. You weren't broadcasting immediately out into the world. It was, pretty small back then. And it was this test and learn kind of approach. So I loved it.
So how long were you doing that before you decided to launch your podcast, Insider Interviews?
Well, I was kind of thrown in the deep end by another former boss of mine, Jack Myers. I left Ad Large and I went over to become the managing editor of MediaVillage, which is a trade publication all about media marketing and advertising. And they were a little light on the audio coverage. So, first, I hired some of the freelance journalists to heavy up on covering radio and this nascent podcast area back in around 2015 or so. And then Jack said, well, you helped launch the podcast division over there. Go build us a podcast. You've been on radio. I was like, what? So it was definitely that do as I say, not as I do. I had to figure out how to do. And I just did it. And for Media Village, I created their first two podcasts, and it was originally called Insider Insights. And then I also launched their Advancing Diversity podcast. So, you know, it was nerve wracking, but it was sort of a paid learning opportunity. And I did about, I don't know, 65 episodes there. And then when I left Media Village with the pandemic, Jack gifted me my podcast to take and use some episodes there again at Media Village. And I redubbed it as Insider Interviews.
What were some of those early challenges with launching a podcast, having not been in this space in particular? And, understanding audio production and content, but the delivery of podcasts was probably very foreign and I mean, in 2015, there was better tech, but probably still not as good as we have it today.
Yeah, that's right. You know, everything was uh, by trial. So I had heard about, for example, Libsyn, and I selected that as my hosting platform and tried to consume everything I could. Luckily, I was in a position where my job was content creation and marketing and writing and journalism about the industry. So I was absorbing as much as I could. That's always been my MO, is just read, read, read. And so I'd heard about Libsyn. Maybe I got to go to one of the early stage podcast movements. Not quite sure how they landed on my radar, but that was terrific. And then I had to figure out what equipment to buy. We hadn't invested in a big budget. I think that I got a Blue Yeti, but then, because I was going all over the place and trying to grab interviews at conferences and things like that, I got my little, I have them here. You want to see?
Oh yeah, sure.
I'm going to, for those listening, I've got my iRig lavaliers. So these little guys are little portable lavaliers that just clip on. And I swear to you, the first 40 episodes I did, I used these iRig lavalier microphones and plugged them into my iPhone. And, it was not bad quality. And honestly, you in the last episode that we did were recorded via those iRig lavaliers too, 6 years later.
I was just going to mention that I had the pleasure of using those with you at Podcast Movement. We just
Yeah.
sat down at a bench outside in what they call the hallway trek at podcasting conferences.
Yeah.
We did the interview, and yeah, it sounded great. In fact, we'll make sure we put a link to that episode here in the show notes. So if you want to check it out, you can. There's other great guests on that episode that are definitely worth your time.
Thank you.
So one other thing that is very interesting about your strategy is that what you are doing is you are basically selling a storytelling package, right? And some people will hear the idea of selling access to a podcast and immediately cringe. And I can understand that because there are lots of people who do it in a very shady way. They don't disclose that that's what they're doing. They don't make it clear that this is paid for. Or worse, I've had people email me, ask me to be a guest on their show. I've accepted, and then I get sent an invoice to appear. And I said, that wasn't really what you asked me. And so there are plenty of folks who don't like it, but you are way more open and transparent about it, and you have a very specific target. So tell us a little bit about how Insider Interviews works and the content package you are offering people today.
Matthew, thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain this because, as I said, I come from content and journalism, and I ran ad sales marketing at some major media networks. And the way that you close a deal is through listening to the customer, and listening is a huge part of marketing. We know that podcasting does a great job with engagement and trust in the guests and the hosts. It's one of the most effective forms of advertising. But I don't sell advertising on the show, and I don't sell a guest spot. What I do is sell, as you said, a content marketing package. And not every episode is underwritten, as I like to call it. But there have been guests who know that as a journalist, I'm pretty good at pushing this out through social media. I'm sort of, as I say, in the algorithm in LinkedIn. So when I post, it's sort of like the old ad when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. I don't know. But my posts get really nice pickup on LinkedIn, and I'm very passionate. I'm an early adopter in social media, so I'm all over the place with that. So my guests will receive a robust presence as well as all of the assets, both audio and video, as you know we do. But then they can hire me to write a journalistically sound companion article that I can pretty much get published in a trade publication. And again, because Insider Interviews is about the industry of media marketing and advertising, there's a handful of trades that, you know, will be appropriate for placing that article. And I've had bylines in most of them. Um, so that, or they can take that article and they can give it to their PR shop and pitch it out for coverage. I can ghostwrite it. They can put it on their blog. They'll get the audio clips, the video clips. So they're getting basically an executive profile. And I'll just reiterate that audio is a trusted medium. When you have a journalist writing something that's not shilling, but giving you a profile of someone, it creates a likability, it creates a trust for and about that executive. Sometimes it gives them a platform that they don't otherwise have if they have to explain something in a detailed way, like I'm doing right now, going on and on too long.
You're not doing that, but
So there's that. I do have news, big
oh,
news.
sure. Let's hear it.
So, Matthew, I think I have to give you credit for this. I believe that on one of your shows, you talked about segments. And I think that that is a terrific trend in podcasting these days, is chunking out your show so that people understand what's coming next. I know that you have like a regular question that you ask. Well, I've had some mid rolls before, and because I like to share detail about a vertical, about different channels, I've worked across print, television, audio, whatever. I started a segment that is sponsorable called The Inside Scoop. So it's like a 5-minute deep dive as a mid roll. So my next episode coming out, you'll hear an underwriter who is giving us a deep dive on digital out of home, for example. So, yeah.
That is a great idea for a segment. And in fact, I used to have clients who, and this is not uncommon in the podcasting world anymore. You would hear a pre-roll early on in the show, right? This episode is brought to you by whatever. Stay tuned to the end of the episode where we talk to so-and-so about this. And then after the episode, they would have this post roll, and the post roll would essentially be like a short interview with someone related to that brand. And I think it's a great way to really tell that story and keep people there for post rolls, especially if you can find a nugget of information from this person that is value add to your target audience. So I love this idea, and wish you the best of luck with it. And we'll make sure, we'll make sure people have links to the show so they could check this out and know how to contact you. I before we get to those final questions that I do want to ask you, one thing that everybody wants to know is better marketing for their podcast. And as somebody with a deep background in marketing, in broadcasting, in television, radio, right? All of these different places, are there one or two strategies or pieces of information, of advice that you would give to podcasters on how to be more successful with their show?
Um, Matthew, the thing that so I also train companies who want to launch, and I focus on B2B, who want to launch their first podcast. For example, I'm the producer of the Angie Trade Up podcast, formerly known as Angie's List. And one of the first things that we talked about is, why does Angie want to have a podcast? Why does anyone want to have a podcast? And if you can answer the why, then you're miles ahead. If it's because you just want to hear yourself talk, most people don't. They don't like the way their voice sounds, and it's startling to them. But if you just want to hear yourself talk, that's a perfectly good reason if you have something to say. If it is to amplify an executive, if you want to share thought leadership, if you want to get more trusted, if you want to be available to the customer along their journey, while they're driving or washing the dishes or whatever it is, those are all solid initial reasons. But starting with the why informs your marketing. So, if it is because you want to reach them anywhere, you might want to consider how long your show is. If it's to be a companion while they're walking the dog or washing the dishes, it might be brief but sweet. If it's just to get attention, then it might be, I don't know, but fill in the blanks. So it starts with the why. And then there's nothing really new under the sun when it comes to promotion and marketing. Uh, Fill in the blanks. We all do the same thing. I'm thrilled to be here on your show. You do a great job with podcasting tech, and I learn a lot from it. So I'm excited to have this opportunity. You were on my show. Now we've exposed ourselves to different audiences in a first cousin kind of related way. Um, and then we could also do a pod swap where my podcast appears in your show flow and you can tee it up, and then your audience will hear an entire episode or just the trailer swap, etc. Certainly when you're a bigger personality, you might take your show live and have it in front of an audience. But really, it's understanding that everything you touch needs to continue your brand message and reflect your brand in the way you want. So we talked about social media earlier. Are you going to align with college kids smashing a beer can on their head, or, a certain political persuasion or whatever it is? Or are you going to kind of have your buttoned up approach and have informative, helpful social media tools and tactics? So, I mean, I could go on and on, but let me know if I missed a specific.
No, I think that's a great answer. And something we've always talked about too is that the importance of understanding your why, right? So many people launch a podcast and they obsess over downloads, and really the focus of their show isn't about how big the audience is, but maybe it's about the people they meet while they're interviewing, or how many of the people who are listening engage in their products. And some folks, it only takes 100 downloads to get those 3 or 4 customers that are going to make the difference between a good year and a bad year for what it is that they're doing. So understanding your why and then strategizing around that, I think is just super important. So as a reminder, we are chatting with EB Moss of Insider Interviews podcast and Moss Appeal. We'll have a link to all of her socials, as well as she has a bit.ly link with everything that she has going on, so you can easily check things out, listen to some content, just see everything that she has to offer, and check it out. And maybe even you want to check out that 5-minute segment in her show where you can, get access to her audience. So before we let you go, yes, we are going to ask you the questions that we ask everybody. And so the first one is there a place you would like to see improvement in podcasting in general?
Um, we've gotten very complicated as an industry. When I first launched my shows, there were a handful of options. I personally get confused between which AI tool might be a good companion to help me generate my clips or my show notes or whatever it is. I don't know about hosting platforms. If I had a wish list, it would be, give me a cheat sheet of, this is great for this is good for that. So I'm frankly a little overwhelmed. My hair was straight before I started working in podcasting, and now it's like
That is I
um
like that piece of advice. Maybe that's something that we can work to put together
yeah,
here.
help me. um but Matt, I do want to give you credit also, because when we met, you gave me my own custom podcast beacon. I cannot tell you how popular I've become at cocktail parties thanks to you. Um, Honestly, we talk so much about the challenge of discovery. So we talked about LinkedIn, for example. There's not a lot of necessarily conversion from a social media post on almost any platform directly to listening to an episode. So we need tools to help break down the barriers. And I think that the podcast beacon that you've created has done that. I have like people giving me jazz hands, like, wow. When all of a sudden I can get them to wave this magic beacon, and all of a sudden it opens up a link to my show and it takes the barrier out of the way. So hats off to you, man. I think it's just, I've gotten an extra 17 listeners thanks to you in the last week.
Oh, awesome. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. And I'm going to make you
80%
record
of my
that later
audience.
for me. And
Okay.
we're going to use that in some of our marketing. And yeah, for those curious, Podcast Beacon, we are uh, actually making a big push right now. We're thinking about how we can partner with different companies and brands so that they can give beacons out to their clients and customers. So if that's something that's interesting to you, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. And I'm
And you
so glad to
didn't
hear
pay
it's
me to
working.
say that.
Yeah, I did not. I
Nope.
might though.
This is not sponsored.
Is there any technology that you would like, that's on your wish list as we start to think about the holidays? Maybe it's something that you've wanted to purchase, or maybe something that hasn't even been created yet that you'd like to see made so that, your production can be a little bit easier.
I'm always challenged. We see the big microphone in front of my face. Very happy that I got my Shure microphone. Thanks to a giveaway. Um, but I see a lot of the little clip on lavaliers now, and I question the quality of them. I love the fact I happen to use Descript to edit my shows, and I love that we have studio sound that can compensate for a lot of the challenges of microphones these days. I typically will also wear, the big can headphones when I'm recording, and that also is not good for my hair. So I'm also confused. And if you could give us a cheat sheet for good, smaller, mobile pieces of recording and listening devices, that would be great.
Awesome. I think we have some of that, but I will make sure we put something together for this episode specifically, and then right afterwards, I've got a couple of personal suggestions for you that I think you'll appreciate. And
Okay.
lastly, is there a podcast out there right now that when that drops, you are stopping what you were listening to, or it's one of those have to listen to shows on your list?
Okay. I, I might have to name four because my mind was going.
As many as you
My
want.
boy My boy Peter Kafka is back. He had Recode Media. Now he has channels. And the great thing about that, he took I don't know, maybe 6 months hiatus, and he raised the bar for me in terms of a media and marketing type of podcast. I really like his style. Gets very informative guests, as do I, by the way. Um, so I like that show. I find the relationship with Professor Galloway and Kara Swisher fascinating on Pivot, and how they get into some things that's very informative from a zeitgeist perspective about the world. I like laughing with Smartless. And then the episode that you were on with me, I am going to give a shout out to Jason Hoke, who started a company called Waveland. He ran How Stuff Works, of course, huge franchise, but he has a show called Noble that has been scoring really high in the podcast rankers. And it's a creepy, creepy topic about finding where the bodies were not buried. I'll just tell you that. Yeah, Noble. And
Okay.
it's a true crime show. So true crime always draws you in. So there you go. News, comedy, business. I think I covered them all.
Yeah, you have got me hooked, and it's funny that you brought up both Peter and Kara, who were former colleagues of mine when I worked for
Oh,
Dow Jones, and always loved chatting with them as well.
yeah.
Well, and we have really loved chatting with you again today, and I look forward to doing this many, many more times.
Thank you.
We've been chatting with Evie Moss of Moss Appeal and insider interviews with Evie Moss. Links to all of that in the show notes. Please, please go check out her stuff and give her a follow on social media. She does have some great content out there that everybody can learn from, whether they're a podcaster or any other type of professional. Evie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Matthew.